Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Today we look at the world around us.
Especially places which are very hot or very cold.
And we talk to this man, Matt Dickinson, an explorer who has experienced extreme temperatures in different parts of the world.
Have you ever been anywhere that was very hot or very cold?
Coldest place is Helsinki in midwinter, and I think it was -20.
Oh, I lived in Madras, India for almost 3 years, and it was extremely hot there.
The coldest would probably be parts of northern Russia, when it was -26, -27. It may not be cold for the locals, but it felt very cold indeed to me.
The hottest place I've ever been to is the deserts of New Mexico in the United States, where it can get up to 40 degrees centigrade quite often. But it's a dry heat, and you don't feel it quite so much.
The hottest place I've ever been to is India. When I was there, the temperature was over 40 degrees Celsius. However, I did spend most of my time in air-conditioned hotels.
The coldest place I've ever been to is Sweden. When I was there, it was 25 degrees below zero. Although it didn't feel cold because it was sunny and it wasn't windy. And of course, there was central heating everywhere.
That's the difference between travelers and explorers. Travelers don't want to be too hot or too cold, whereas explorers visit the hottest and coldest and most dangerous places on Earth because they want to experience the heat, the cold, and the danger.
That's right. Being very hot or very cold can be exciting. However, not everyone would agree.
Oh, it's freezing.
What?
It's freezing. I can't put up with this at all.
Oh, it's not as cold as last year.
What? I think it's much colder than last year.
No, it isn't. Although I admit the wind is a bit stronger. Come on, let's go for a swim.
A swim? Here? You must be joking. The water's like ice.
It's not. It's a lot warmer than last year. Come on.
I'm not a very good swimmer.
Of course you are. You swim much better than I do.
No, I don't.
You're not enjoying this holiday, are you?
No, not much.
And I was looking forward to coming here so much.
Listen again to these ways of comparing weather conditions.
It's not as cold as last year.
I think it's much colder than last year.
Much colder. Or here's another way to compare.
It's a lot warmer than last year.
There are still professional explorers who travel to remote parts of the world. People who enjoy the experience of extreme temperatures and dangerous conditions. We're going to meet such a person. His name is Matt Dickinson. First of all, Matt talks about an expedition to the Namib Desert in Southwest Africa, one of more than 40 expeditions he has made. So, how far has he traveled?
I believe that I've travelled about 1 million miles in my travelling career since 1976, and every single one of them has been a great pleasure and of fantastic interest to me. Last year, I was fortunate enough to be invited to join an expedition to cross the Namib Desert in southwest Africa, and it took me into extremes of heat that I've never encountered before.
We're 115. 115.
115.
Check it out.
In the shade. Our journey was 5.5 days from start to finish, and we had to carry an enormous quantity of water to enable us to survive. It's a bit like carrying a refrigerator on your back.
Yeah.
It's that sort of weight.
All right.
There goes. Okay, what have we got here? That's about 36 kilograms. Now, the decision we made was to walk for 2 or 3 hours in the morning and 2 or 3 hours in the late afternoon, and then rest through the rest of the day underneath a space blanket. And what we did was to stretch it between a rock surface and the desert floor, and then shelter underneath it in the shade for the hottest part of the day. In that place, nothing can survive. We walked through a great forest, and one associates trees with leaves and shade and life and energy, and all that was left were the skeletons of the trees, just the simple bare branches. It was an eerie and rather intimidating place.
What an extraordinary place. As Matt said, the trees were like skeletons.
All that was left were the skeletons of the trees. No leaves, no shade, no life, no energy.
The Namib Desert is the hottest place that Matt has visited. He said that it had
Extremes of heat that I've never encountered before.
Now, Matt Dickinson tells us about a completely different expedition, a trip down a river in Tibet. The problem is, it's a white water river, a very fast-moving river.
One of the most frightening moments I think I've ever had came when I was invited to join an American and Indian team on the Brahmaputra River, which is a whitewater river. It comes crashing out of the Himalayas. It's extremely turbulent and full of rocks, and at some stages you can see no blue water at all. It's completely white and very, very dangerous. The objective was to raft for 120 miles down the river on a stretch of the river that, as far as we knew, had never been rafted before. And it began at a very remote village right on the border of China and India. We set off, and for several days it would be true to say that our expedition was almost completely out of control. There's a limit to the amount of maneuverability of a small rubber raft when it's being tossed from wave to wave in the grip of a ferocious river like the Brahmaputra.
All forward, all forward, all forward! Carry on,
Now, this river offers an extreme environment in every sense. It's extremely cold because the water has come from the meltwater snows of Tibet. And we knew from the start that the turbulent, freezing cold conditions of the Brahmaputra could give us some serious problems. Now, we were extremely lucky on several occasions to avoid being tipped out of the boat, but we all knew that eventually disaster might strike, and it was only a matter of time as we bobbed our way down the river, often out of control, that some mishap would occur. Well, it did. We went into a wave which was far too big for our rubber raft to survive, and I felt the extreme rush of adrenaline as the freezing cold water bit into us, and I was plunged into the water as the boat went over. I felt the air being sucked out of my lungs, and as I came out of the swirling white water into which we'd been plunged, I was gasping for breath and completely disorientated. And then it was the horrifying experience of being swept completely out of control with our raft upside down the Brahmaputra River to we knew not what fate.
Phew, he really knows how to enjoy himself.
And did you notice that he was filming when he fell off the raft? A very dangerous expedition, and you can tell by the way he described it.
The river was extremely cold and extremely turbulent. The expedition was almost completely out of control.
We've heard Matt describe the journey across the desert and the whitewater rafting. But how does he compare the dangers of the two expeditions?
There are many differences between the desert and the savage and frightening forces of a whitewater river. The desert is not as terrifying. The river has a great deal of noise. There's the rushing of the water, there's the grinding and rumbling of great rocks, perhaps the size of a house, as they are pushed underneath the surface of the river downstream by the force of the water. But each place has its own dangers, and each place can be life-threatening if things go wrong. And I think that's the fascinating thing about extremes of environment, that the heat, the aridity, the all-embracing oven of the desert is just as dangerous as the savage forces of a whitewater river. But to be in that environment is a completely different experience, and it requires a completely different approach, both mentally and physically, in order to survive.
So, which place was more dangerous, the desert or the whitewater river? Matt's opinion was this.
Each place has its own dangers. The desert is not as terrifying as the river. But the heat of the desert is just as dangerous as the force of the river.
Well, I suppose India isn't the hottest place in the world after all.
And Sweden isn't as cold as I thought it was.
And traveling on the London Underground isn't really that uncomfortable. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.